Okay, so I thought I thought on this how to communicate this even simpler. And of course, the simpler I make it, then I'm leaving things out. But just to really initially get this idea about this TV set, why I picked it. Imagine you somehow exist on the you can climb inside your television and you exist on the TV screen. Now, you understand that your TV screen is information. Let's call it. Let's not get into what is information, but you understand there's information on the TV screen, um, and normally you're looking at pictures that are being transmitted to the screen, movie or TV program. But let's say you are now information on that screen. Just not worry about how that can be the case. This is essentially what is going on. This is what people call reality. It's as if you are inside this. So that's why I call it an information domain. A TV is an information domain. It has information on it. And um, now, if we ask this question, people say, well, what's outside the television? You would understand that you could move around on this television screen. You could go to this left edge, this right edge. You could move around all over the screen, but you couldn't get climb off of the screen. This is true of um, the universe itself. Essentially, we are not here either. Um, you know, our intellect is inside um, this universe, if you like, and you could move to the edge, but you couldn't. Just like this TV screen, you couldn't move off it. You're inside an information domain. Okay, so that's the information domain. Is this? What I mean, your intellect. So the information that's on the TV screen, you can move it around, you can change it, you can look for patterns in the information that's on the screen. Um, you have sensory perceptions of sight, sound, taste. That puts information on the TV screen. This is your intellect, but that is also the difference is that the information that is on our TV screen um, is coming also from the outside, right? What I'm saying is that is what I'm calling the symphonic perception. We are also receiving information that appears on the screen. Some of the information we have it from our senses and our domain and this computer, this your brain, your biological computer that rearranges this information. But sometimes information also comes from the outside. And also, the difference between the TV is that this is also transmitting back to the outside. This is the main difference. So you have this duality, and this is the veil, as I call it, um, between your intellect that's inside the television, and intellect is primarily just information processing, like a computer, versus the symphonic self, which is the place where you actually feel and where you actually have what I call comprehension, and you can actually download or understanding, and you can also download information from there, just like a transmitter sends information to a TV screen. And in science, science relates to the intellect only. From inside the box, that information that comes from outside appears to be, people would say it's random. What I'm saying is it's mostly, some of it might be random, but most of it isn't random. And we will have to get into this, but so the reason it appears random is because to identify the patterns, you have to already have this perception. This is this perceptual paradox. With intellect, you're very unlikely to be able to see it, and your intellect can always dismiss it. For example, you could say a coincidence. Something keeps happening, oh, but that's just a coincidence. That's correct. With intellect, you could say there's a certain probability that that is just a coincidence. But that doesn't mean it is a coincidence. There's just a certain probability that it is. And this is the danger of this word random. What symphonic perception gives you once you have this is the realization that these things are not random, that they are transmissions effectively. And an example of this is repeating patterns in your life where you can say you can always dismiss it as random, um, but it isn't. And how you can tell the difference? Well, you have to develop this connection. You have to become this awareness or comprehension. Um, that isn't to say that everything that happens it has a meaning. This phrase like, well, everything happens for a reason. That's not true. It's not everything. So the difficulty is, identifying what I call the trains and the train stations, and that's too big a discussion. We'll go into all that. That's involved. What I've observed in myself and other people. There's no doubt about it. Like I've done these experiments myself my whole life. But I see from that intellect would find it almost impossible to perceive these patterns on its own, because you've always got the out of saying, well, but there's a 1 in 100 million that could be, so that it could be chance. We could even get into Stephen Hawking's work on black holes. But I read his work, and I think a lot of people don't. He wasn't, to be honest, a brilliant communicator, so his books are quite difficult to read, and you probably need a quite strong physics background. But there was some buried things in there about point particles being redistributing information from black holes. So again, that's getting some deep science, but the mechanisms by which this could be occurring, even with intellect, can eventually might be able to be experimented with and seen. But the bottom line of it is this we fool ourselves with this word random a lot. That ironically, a lot of things that we think are cause and effect are in fact random. You could read Nicholas Taleb, Fooled by Randomness, to address that. World's top probability mathematician. So, for example, in business or so-called success, people always want to perceive it's because they had a brilliant idea or a better product, but it turns out that if you actually examine it, as Nicholas Taleb did, that the differentiator was not the talent. The differentiator was random probability, luck. Basically, it's like I say, if you cloned Tiger Woods and 100 Tiger Woods entered a competition, which Tiger Woods would win? They're all identical, but only one could win because it's a zero-sum game, and then because of that, it becomes chance. But that's getting into sort of probability theory that people haven't studied, but that's a good way of thinking about it. But as I say, the important point is that a lot of things that happen in your life that appear to be random are the opposite. They are not chance. And the most obvious one is a repeating pattern over and over and over again. Anyway, I will go more into that, but I just wanted to give this simpler kind of way of thinking about it. What's this information, intellect, data? You could say data. If you think of your computer right now, if it contains information, data, but it also could have a wireless connection, so you can download. So I said about the idea of you could download from the internet, so that through a wireless connection, and you can upload, and that is so the same way you could think of your symphonic self as the internet of self. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of different ways to express this. It's a weird. It's one of these things that once you can perceive it, it's so obvious. But until you can perceive it, it just doesn't seem believable. It doesn't seem possible. So, like I said, my example of a composer. If you listen, and I've researched all this extensively. Like if you look at painters, like for the, top painters or musicians who wrote, amazing inspirational songs, they mostly say that that it just came to them like literally overnight. Like they didn't like sit there and intellect their way to it. Air quotes, intellect, think. It's not informational. It's like I say, they're sort of downloading it, and that's it is because they're coming from this internet of self, their symphonic self. It's vibration. Music is vibration. And that is why it resonates with so many people, those particular pieces of music. If you try to sit down, let's say we design an AI and it can learn all the rules of music and everything and try to design it, that music is very unlikely to be inspirational like Mozart or Bohemian Rhapsody or something. Um, it's what I say called templated creativity. It's not really creativity at all. You're just using rules. A lot of music does this, where people just take a song and then slightly change some chords or melody and then call it a different song. But that's not the same thing as what I'm talking about. Um, you can see the same thing in art. An artist who creates a completely new genre of art through history. Um, what's hard to understand is that all your feelings and emotions and even your comprehension and your perceptions are happening over here and not here. They can't be happening here because this is just an information. Essentially, our intellect and this information is just data, so it doesn't feel anymore. It's a biological computer in that sense. Um, and I say, if that wasn't the case, this is why I used AI thinking and thought experiments my whole life, because I realized we will be able to construct this, the intellect, we will be able to construct eventually an AI that is exactly or almost the same as human intelligence in terms of how we process information and how we store information. But it will not be able to have any of these the symphonic elements of this that I've just gone through in this video, and that will be how it will be realized from inside the box through intelligence that this is the case. Okay, so hopefully that adds something to the explanations I've given that's a bit simpler. But where it gets really tricky is even in human intelligence. So we need to talk about what I call bounded and unbounded problem spaces. That AI, I believe, will be limited to bounded problem spaces, and we need to discuss that. So once it becomes AIs using human type intelligence eventually will be even better at finding patterns and that kind of thinking than us, but they will never be able to answer ethical or moral questions, which are an example of unbounded questions. Because what's happening is that you are crossing over and crossing the veil into your symphonic self when you try to comprehend those things. Again, that's assuming that the AI isn't programmed with what we call emulation, which is essentially cheating. I'm saying if you just purely try to mimic, which is what the thought experiment I'm talking about, that purely copied what is observable about human intelligence, it would not be able to answer those questions at all. Anyway, I don't want to get into that. That gets really involved. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to mention here. Yeah, as I said, like each of us here is our information space is independent, is separate, individual, whereas here the symphonic space we overlap. I said think of a tree with branches and leaves. So people you resonate with are on the same branch as you more, but you are still a unique leaf. So the genius of this is that it allows us to experience individuality whilst also experiencing a collective consciousness over here. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Sorry, I'm just thinking anything else I wanted to put in this video. Well, why do you want to experience individuality? Because you want to learn through the experience of attachment and loss of attachment. For example, is this polarity is what it gives us. I told about the contrast of, you understand hot because you've experienced cold, and you understand cold better because of hot. If you want to understand yourself, even though you're part of your symphonic self, even though you're part of this tree, if you like, that's a leaf, you can understand yourself better by creating this artificial separation, this contrast in this domain. This, as I understand it from my symphonic perception, is really this almost the sole purpose of the domain. I believe there, we can experience other domains once you evolve out of this one. Then there's many other or infinite possibilities of domains, of what I call experience domains. This is just, so it's an information domain, but it's also an experience domain, and there would be infinite, really, kinds of these. The intellect wants to ask, well, how are we transmitting the information out? And I said, well, there's kind of, as I understand it, across the veil here, there's a bridge of quantum entangled information. So this is a physical domain. So we have physicality achieved through this, you could say, a technology of quantum fields. And then the information itself is quantum entangled. You don't need all the rest of it, but you just need the information, and then somehow that bridges across to pure vibration. Now, how does that work? Okay, well, you've asked the question. I'll give you my take on that. Again, like everything I've said, why you have to listen to the intro, this is not claiming to be the absolute truth. I'm also not trying to persuade you. I'm giving my understanding. So if you take, I said the TV screen is two-dimensional, but our domain is three-dimensional. So if you break it into points, we could call these point particles, like electrons or bosons or quarks. But they exist because of quantum fields. But okay, let's just say one appears or manifests. You could say here to say it's an electron. What I understand, or what maybe we can eventually test in science, is that electron point is the end point. If you can imagine, like if we could trace it like this, is the end point. We're looking at if you had a piece of string and you looked at the end of piece of string, it would look like a point. So this is a piece of string, and this is the end point, and this is the string, and this is string theory. If I'm combining string theory with quantum physics, basically here, and I'm saying that these point particles are really the end point, as if looking at the end of a piece of string, except that they don't. So every point particle, every point in our TV set or universe goes to another place, which is this symphonic domain, and it can send information back and forth in that way. That's what I understand. And if you vaguely can look at the math of string theory, this is, so we talk about, I said it's in another dimension. What is a dimension? So our minds in intellect, in information domain, cannot comprehend it. That's what I was saying. I was talking Lao Tzu thousands of years ago, he was just saying, I mean, he obviously didn't have any of this scientific, but it doesn't really matter. He had symphonic perception, and so he just called this symphonic perception the Tao. He just said, well, it's something outside of us, it's the Tao. What I'm saying is that we are now evolving the ability to reveal some of the Tao, as I say, chisel away the rock, the outside, to reveal some of the shape of this, how it's working. I'm not saying it's not a total comprehension. It's not possible until we reach our full evolution within this in another 100,000 years or whatever, and then eventually we can totally chisel away and totally understand all of this, but we're not there. That's why we have to continue to push the rules of like grand unification in physics and everything else. But interesting string theory is it's actually not going to one other place, it's going to many, depending on how you look, it's going to 9 or 12 or whatever the other places. I don't understand fully what's going on with that, but it's likely that is because there's what we call a fractal nature to all of this. So in other words, the reason there is more than one is that this isn't just going to, as I said, the observer. There's the observer of the observers, and so on. So it's a fractal. But I don't want to get into all that here. It just overcomplicates. So that's my so there's quantum entanglement to to then endpoints of strings that go here. So I think this is probably how this works in the bridge area. I mean, you know, it's one way I see combining what we know. Say as we continue to push and understand more, we'll be able to focus this in and get more detail and understand it better. So yeah, we are all multi-dimensional in this sense. It's just most people in this domain can only perceive the, you know, a few of them, and trapped in their intellect. I went over that, like, well, why are some people, I'm just thinking, people have asked me, well, why? Everybody, as I say, everybody is the same. We're all experiencing this back and forth. Everybody, obviously, all feeling, all sensory perception, comprehension is an experience of this. Every time you're moved by music or something, color or visual or an emotion, you're experiencing your symphonic self that isn't in this domain. But why are only a small percentage of people able to have this perception from over here back? So I went through the journey up the mountain in the first video. What benefit is there to not having that? I said because it makes you to fully explore your physical, your survival mode, if you like. In intellect, it makes you go through all those phases I went through. It drives you, it gives you purpose through all of those. If once you have this symphonic perception, you have very little interest in those, so it removes those air quotes motivations, those purposes. So that's the reason. Okay. So and again, it's not better. No one is better. Everyone goes through this journey. It's not a race. It's just, there is no. It's so that every person can have the individual journey, and no one can tell them the truth. There is no. But Mark, you said, what about highly elevated people, Lao Tzu, Jesus, whatever? Yeah, I mean, they're just doing what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to flesh it out more with science and other things, and reasoning. But I mean, as I said, it doesn't work in the sense that the world didn't follow Lao Tzu and the world didn't really follow Jesus. All his words got completely twisted and distorted by those in the physical and early intellectual into religions that have corrupted and exploited and abused, and wars and torture and judgment and all these terrible things for the last thousands of years, right? So then you could say, well, should you not do that? Well, you've got to be what you are, so you've got to put that energy out, that vibration out, but you can't be responsible for. So as I say, this is the end of this video, just to pull everything together. If these are cells, and there's trillions of cells in your body. There's a group of cells here we could say are highly elevated, that have reached this point, and then these cells are less elevated in the body, and then these cells are in the physical. So these cells are in the intellectual, these cells are in the physical. So if you took the collective symphonic self, its evolution right now from the beginning of civilization to now, as I said, it started out all in the physical, then intellect developed, now the symphonic perception is developing, and it's evolving like a person. But so those cells need to be what those cells are. I mean, you wouldn't say to your eye, well, you're only a few cells, so you shouldn't exist. You have to try and express that, and even though you're not going to be able to change the body whole, the full consciousness. The real challenge is to not get what I call de-elevated. Once you cross the chasm, you can't really be de-elevated, but before that, you certainly can. You can be pulled back into these other vibrations, base vibrations. Okay. So I'll stop this one here, but I just wanted to sort of try and pull everything I've said together into this video. Take care.